You're listening to the Mile High Vineyard podcast. For more information about the Mile High Vineyard, go to milehighvineyard.org.
Good morning. Happy Father's Day. Yeah, there is always a percentage of people in the room that we said Happy Father's Day. And there were some of you that went, oh no, that's right, it is Father's Day. I gotta go call my dad. Anybody want to admit that happened to you? You just forgot completely? It's okay. The Lord knows. Okay, so you can lie to me. That's fine. That's totally fine. But Jesus sees you. So you learned something in church today. So there you go. We helped you. We helped you this week. If you haven't been with us, we're doing a series in Ruth and Esther through the whole summer, which we've been doing series like this a few years now. And we're doing Ruth and Esther because some commentators would say, looking at culture, some would say it was last year, some would say this year is the year of women. And no women cheer. Okay, that's fine. Because you're like, it's always the year of women, whatever. That could be, maybe. That's actually not true. Okay, so I actually do think something amazing is happening right now in our culture. We'll talk about that a bit later. But we're going to go through this, and we're actually using an app that we've used in the past. If you've not looked at the Read Scripture app, how many of you have this app on your phone? Okay. The rest of you, my assumption is you have an incredible Bible reading plan. You're in year 4 of a 10-year plan. It's very detailed. It's super significant. You're just sticking to it every day faithfully, right? Okay, maybe not. So what I'd recommend, if you don't have something that is working for you or actually doing, why not try this? Why not just try this for this summer? It'll help kind of get your head into the book and think through the scriptures, because we've talked about this a lot in the past. You know, having disciplines with God are a big deal. Things that you do every single day to train, to connect with Him, to become like Him. And so one of those is really reading and understanding the Bible. So we'll be doing Ruth and Esther. It'd be great for you to do the Read Scripture app. It works with the Bible Project. And I'm going to show us a video right now, the Bible Project, that will summarize Ruth up to the part that we'll be studying today. So let's watch that video, and then we'll think about what it means for us.
The Book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are 3 main characters in the book: Naomi, the widow, Ruth, the Moabite, and Boaz, the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line, "In the days when the judges ruled." And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they move on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi, and she says, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. And so the 2 of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions provision so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. He prays for her that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, and Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe the woman of Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events.
That's pretty good, huh? It's definitely faster than me summarizing. I'll tell you that much. And Ruth is such an interesting book. A lot of people have not studied this book, but there's so many interesting things happening in the passage and in the book as a whole. It's an interesting book because, well, it's a quiet little story where there's no kings, there's no prophets. There's nothing that would really make a history book until we get to the very end. We'll see why this story is so significant. And the characters, of course, are set in the backdrop. This is what's critical for understanding the book as a whole, in the time of the judges, where everyone does what is right in their own eyes. Meaning, the traditions of the past, religious frameworks of the past, the moral fabric of the past, that doesn't matter anymore. We just make up our own way now. We get to decide who we are. We get to decide what we want to do. We get to decide how we want to do it, because that's just what we want to do. That's the time of the judges. Does that sound familiar? Let me say it all again. It doesn't matter what anybody said before. It doesn't matter what the traditions told us about how money works, about what it means to be married, about what it means to be a citizen, a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife. None of those things matter. We now will just subscribe to whatever expert is sort of nearby, and we can abandon and jettison thousands of years of practices and helpful ways of thinking about what it means to be a healthy, whole human being. Who cares? We'll just find experts. And what that usually means is, I know what I want to do. Let me just go find someone that agrees with me, and then I'll go, that guy's smart. Does that sound familiar? And that's why this story is so powerful, because in the midst of the time of the judges, these few people in this story stand out as people that are faithful and loyal and courageous and thoughtful, when seemingly that's not rewarded in any way by the outside world or even by the people that surround them. And what I'll make a case for here in a moment is that Naomi's little plan to connect Ruth and Boaz is actually a shortcut. She has a plan that's kind of tricky. Instead of going through the hard work of what it would look like to actually follow through on the way God aligned things, Naomi creates a little shortcut because she can already kind of see where it's going. You know, I already know where God wants to end this. Why don't I just find the shortest route there? Have you ever tried a shortcut? You just thought, I kind of know where this is going to end up. why don't I just get there faster? Why don't I just find an easier way? Why don't I find a way that's more comfortable for me? Now, there's silly examples of this. We all have done silly things for shortcuts, whether it's driving or traveling somewhere or trying to solve a problem that there's probably a right way to do it, but you're not really sure how to do that, or you can't afford to do that, or whatever. So you just find a simple way to get there. I was thinking about this for myself. My silly shortcuts almost all revolve around the fact that I don't know how to fix anything. I wasn't raised in a home where we fix stuff in our house or our car or anywhere, so I've just spent most of my life just making things up to make it work. I remember when I was first married, my headlight went out of my car. I went in to get it fixed. It was like $800. And I remember thinking, that might as well be $8 million. Like, I can't afford that. So I went to Walmart, and I found a piece of Tupperware that was the exact size of the headlight casing. And I thought, this is going to be great. So I just got a new light bulb. I just duct taped it onto there to seal it so water couldn't get in. Voila, new headlight. And I remember getting pulled over by a cop for something else. And he goes, hey, come out here and look at this with me. He looks at it, he goes, what is this? I go, that's a working headlight. That's what that is. He goes, is that Tupperware? Did you duct tape Tupperware onto your car? I go, yeah, man, I sealed it all up. And he's like, I don't think that's like allowed. And I went, is that illegal? He goes, I don't know if it's technically illegal, but do we need to make a law so that you don't do that? I'm like, you might have to, because that's what I'm doing. So, I don't know. And I'm not even kidding. I can give you as many stories as you want. Trying to wire things in my home, getting shocked multiple times. I mean, all kinds of things. I can tell you as many as you want. And those are silly things, and maybe you have your own little weird things you've done to try to manage this or that problem, and it doesn't actually make sense. Seriously, I have like 100 of these. But those are silly. There's ones that cost and have lasting implications. I mean, I suppose being shocked to death could have been one for me, but there's bigger ones. I mean, people try to find shortcuts financially all the time. It turns out every single day, I get a piece of mail or a phone call, often both, of people telling me how they want to give me money. And they say it just like that. Because you're amazing, we want to give you money. Some of you are like, who does that? Well, it's called credit cards. And because we've managed to have decent credit, they say, you don't have to wait for that TV. You don't have to wait for that car. You don't have to wait to do the improvement on your house. We'll just give you the money now. And I think, what a generous world we live in. But actually, that's not how it works, right? Because you accrue interest. And there's people in this room right now listening to me that you're paying for a car you don't drive anymore. That the TV you bought that you bought for $500 is now worth something like $5,000 for the fact that the credit just keeps rolling up on you on the interest. And you know you're in extra trouble when you use credit cards to pay off credit cards. So now I'm using credit to manage credit. That's when you know, I'm falling in a hole. And here's the deal. Here's what the scriptures teach really simply with money. You make money, then you give some money, then you save some money, and you plan for the future. And whatever's left, you budget that, and that's what you live on. And it turns out if you do that, your life works better. You have less stress. It's longer. It takes more time to get the things you want. It takes more time to be able to maybe have the house you want, or the car you want, or the stuff you want. It's a longer road, But you live with a certain kind of peace and blessing because there's really only two kinds of people that exist in the world, people that pay interest and people that get interest. And it turns out the people that get interest have more money than you. They're doing really well. We generally call them bankers. They're doing great because they're making money on their money doing nothing. It's really simple math, right? And the Bible is super clear about this. Don't, at all costs, avoid debt. It's like being strangled to death. But we say, I can take a shortcut. In the first chapter, we talked about how a lot of what the themes of this book are around marriage and relationships. And we live in a culture right now that just says, I can just do whatever I want. I know that I'm going to get married anyway. Why don't I just do whatever I want to do to get there? In church, we even spiritualize it and say, well, God provided this relationship. And we're going to be married anyway. And let's save some money and let's do this or that. It doesn't, come on. Who cares what God actually says? It really just matters if I get to where I'm trying to go. And there's a shorter way there. And I might save a little bit of money, and it might make it easier. And what's amazing about this quiet little story in the Bible is God honors the faithfulness of people that make decisions day in and day out to not take shortcuts and to demonstrate and represent God all along the way. Now, this story gets more complicated because the counsel to take a shortcut comes from an elder who's trying to represent wisdom from God. And so I know this might be startling to you, but there are people that claim to follow God who give you bad advice. You're like, oh, this is shocking. And that is, I think that's the case we make in this Bible. By the way, as we go to in this text, as we look at this text, I want to warn you, if you've been raised in church, you've done the Sunday school version of Ruth, it is partly my job to obliterate that today. Because a whole bunch of crazy things happen in this text that pastors attempt to sanitize and commentators attempt to sanitize to make it seem cleaner and nicer and make sure everybody looks good. But there's a lot of really weird stuff that happens in this text that frankly challenges some of our presuppositions of what the Bible characters look like. So, Ruth chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, we read it just a moment ago. Let me just refresh your memory. This is Naomi's proposition. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now is not Boaz, our kinsman, with whose maids you were, behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies. You shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do." She said to her, "I will say, all that you say I will do." Okay, many commentators go way out of their way to say there's nothing sexual happening here. This is a cultural practice. There's nothing lewd. There's nothing strange happening. It's culturally that Ruth was a widow, and now she's saying she's not a widow, and she's demonstrating that she's like available, and that's really all that's happening. It turns out there's like nothing in the ancient cultural practices that would indicate that, nor anything within the Bible at all. That's simply an attempt to sanitize the text. From within the Bible itself and within the outlying culture, extra-biblical texts, we know that this moment of the harvest, when they finish the harvest, is a big party. And it's a party that can get out of control. Much like parties exist today at the end of like a big moment where you've done a lot of work, like your corporate Christmas party. There's always a moment at a corporate Christmas party where you're like, oh no, this has gone too far. And Just like that, and some of you right now are going, what does that even mean? I only know and follow Jesus. What is this you speak of? The text indicates that Naomi knows this. She says, wait until he's done eating and drinking, meaning they've had enough wine. It's going to be loosened up a little bit. And then after he's been loosened up a little bit, you go and present yourself to him and do whatever he asks. Again, this is probably news to most of you since you're all good church people. It turns out alcohol changes the way you think. I know. That just you're being educated. If you have too much alcohol, it can lower your inhibitions. This is why there's ladies' night at the bar. There's never guys' night. It's always ladies' night where you get a free drink, because what we're hoping is we get everybody loosened up and they'll do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. I know some of you are shocked. What a scandal. That's true with ladies' night. It's also true with karaoke. You'll see people sing that would never sing in public. They're like, I got this, watch this. And it's always because they've had a few, right? And the same thing's happening here. And by the way, even within the text, we see this, but we see it also outside of the text, within the Bible as a whole. Within the Bible as a whole, this phenomenon is described a few different places. For all four of you taking notes, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 13 to 15. In the law, God commands his people to not celebrate the harvest parties the way everyone else does. They all get drunk. They all have a huge celebration. The workers leave, and that's when you invite in the prostitutes for the masters. Don't be like them. Hosea chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, same admonition from a minor prophet. And for a long story, if you want to read it this week, Genesis chapter 38 gives a long story of how there's a setup where they know that there's this big celebration, and they send people to pretend to be prostitutes because they know that's the practice of what the people do around. Naomi knows this is what's happening. She's already, from chapter 2, seen Boaz. This is the kinsman redeemer. This is the right person. You're going to get married, okay? This is going to happen. She sees the writing on the wall. She's thinking this is what God's up to. Let's skip some steps. If I can put you in the right scenario and you demonstrate that you're available, if he has sex with you, it's all going to go down. And let's not be completely naive here. In a very real way, Naomi is protecting herself. She's an older widow. She doesn't have support. She knows that if Ruth is taken care of, there's above average odds she's taken care of. Now, before we're too hard on Naomi, remember the setting we're in. This is the days of the judges. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes. She sees a godly man. She sees an opportunity. She knows where it's already going to go. Why don't we just get there? Can you see all the pressure? Some of you right now are like, I always liked Naomi. What does this mean? Well, it means she's like you. She's like me. It means she would probably fit in Denver right now. I mean, listen, we have some kind of way of loosening people up with alcohol, and people that are saying, really what's most important are my desires, specifically sexually, and we can leverage those to get to the end that we want. We just do it. And the story, to ruin the story slightly, if you've not read it, it turns out they do get married. And you can imagine Naomi saying, see, fudged a little on the outside. It doesn't really matter. We all knew where this was going. We all knew what was going to happen. What difference does it make? As a pastor, I sit with couples all the time that say, I believe that God put us together. We're not married, but we're going to live together. We save a little bit of money. We're going to do this and that. It helps us get to, and we'll get married anyway. And listen, Jay, you might not know this, but married people have sex, and so we'll have all the sex we want later. Why not have some now? What difference does it make? We're all going that way. This is what everybody does anyway. And here's the truth. Even the CDC, even governmental agencies that study our culture tell us that if you live together before you get married, your odds of divorce double immediately. By the way, it's hard to stay married in our culture, period. Right now. Why would you make it harder on yourself? In other words, the Bible teaches something really clearly, that the culture is like, yeah, I mean, that would be bad. You should not live together before you get married because it erodes the power of commitment. And it turns out the Bible's true. I love it when the scientific world keeps looking back at us and going, man, the Bible's really good. This is really helpful. We should probably try what the Bible says. It's like, yeah, well, shocking. Okay, so there's tons of evidence, of course, from the text. I'm not going to keep arguing. I know different commentators would argue with me, but I think it's really plain when you look at the context, you look at exactly what she says, the way she tells her to dress herself up, and all of the different kinds of things to do. This compromises a number of things, and I'm going to do them very quickly. Number one, Naomi proposes to solve a problem in secret that should have been done in public. There's an entire process by which a kinsman redeemer is to redeem the family. It's laid out in the law. There's a way to do it. And it turns out, which we'll find out in a second, there's already another kinsman redeemer that's in front of Boaz. Naomi probably knows this and doesn't want to deal with the mess of all that. If we cut a corner, we can get to where we want to go. We don't have to do this in public. We'll just do it in secret. And by the way, if you have convinced yourself you're doing something right, but you're having to do it in secret, you might want to wonder if it's actually right. I'm shocked when people are like, oh, we'll just get married in private and nobody has to know. What's the point? I don't understand what you're doing right now. The point of getting married is to demonstrate something publicly to God in front of people and with your authority. I don't understand. If you're trying to do, I don't understand what you're trying to do. I don't understand why you're trying to make a purchase financially that you're going to hide from other people. Why are you doing that? If you feel embarrassed about how you're spending your money, you should be thoughtful about what you're doing with your money. You know, anything you're trying to do in secret that you'd be afraid if somebody saw it publicly, it means you should pause and ask a question, especially if you know there was another way to do it publicly that you're purposefully avoiding. So she wants to solve a problem in secret, should be done publicly. Number two, Naomi's plan seeks to appeal to the base instincts and impulses of Boaz rather than his higher sense of duty. We're about to see that Boaz is an honorable man, but she has a trick, and her trick is, let's just appeal to kind of like his desires and get it done. And let me just tell you, that is always a temptation. It's always a temptation to manipulate people based on what they already kind of want to get done what you think they should get done. Let me be more direct. I feel this as a pastor. There's things that I want the people of God in the church to do that they may or may not do, that I know that I can trick you into doing other ways. So for example, the scriptures are clear to be connected to a local body where you gather and you worship, you submit and serve, and you're generous to one another and to the people of God and to the local church is a command that's clearly aligned in the scriptures over and over and over again. I can either teach you and say, this is kind of the pattern, follow God, be in a local community, serve and be generous. You should just do that because you love and follow God. You should do that. Or I can say, one kid will win an Xbox this week. If you attend church, we'll do a raffle. Parents are like, we're getting our kid there. That's like a lot of, I'm going to save some money. Hey guys, we got brand new fog and lasers. We're going to give away a car. I know a church that gave away a Harley once a month for 6 months. Church, you're like, what? Why aren't we doing that? Okay, you're not getting the illustration, if that's what you said. But the point I'm making is this. That's appealing to your baser instincts to try to get you what I know that you should do in the scriptures say, instead of doing the hard work of just saying, let's grow up and be adults together. Let's figure out what it is to know and follow Jesus together. Let's learn how to be the church. I mean, whenever I talk to a couple and I say, the scripture is really clear, sex is inside of marriage, the next thing I can see everybody thinking, I could see it in the eyes of the single people in the room, define sex. Okay, if you're asking that question, we're done with the conversation, because really the question you should be asking instead is, how do I honor God and have the best for my life with him? How do I live in a way that I have the blessing of God in my life? That's what I want. And so I want to do whatever it takes. If you come to the Bible looking for loopholes, the Bible does not speak to you the right way. But if you come to the text saying, I want to know what it is to follow this God who gave his life for me, that I could become more like him, you're going to have answers everywhere. Does this make sense? So Naomi wants to do something in secret that should be done in public. I'm going to do a couple more really quickly. Her plan doesn't call for thoughtful reflection, but rather impulsive, irreversible action. Her scheme needlessly puts the reputation of two godly people at risk. Let's say that she didn't want any of that. It definitely puts them at risk. And ultimately, here's the gist. Here's the last bit. Naomi's plan seems to assume that the end justifies the means. It turns out God isn't just interested in the outcome, he's interested in how you live. And that's the theme of the story. How you make decisions is important to God. How you choose to forgive, how you choose to love, how you choose to be generous, how you choose to be loyal matters, not just where you end up. So let me finish quickly, because the story takes an interesting twist when you consider all that in mind. So verse 6, key verse. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. According to. Right there in the Hebrew, it's not saying she did it, but she did the gist of it. You'll see that in a moment. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of a heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. It happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled. He bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I'm Ruth, your maid." This is a key verse. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Then he said, "May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You've shown your kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do whatever you ask. For all my people in the city know that you're a woman of excellence. Now it is true that I'm a close relative. However, there's a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning." So she laid down at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." Again, he said, "Give me the cloak that is on you and hold it." So she held it out. He measured out 6 measures of barley and laid it on her, and she went to the city. A couple interesting things happen here. First, the text says he did according to, but the Hebrew is interesting in saying that she didn't actually do everything. So here's what's weird. Ruth, she's putting a rock in a hard place. She's supposed to obey her mother-in-law, okay? So she's supposed to obey Ruth, but she also doesn't want to disobey God. Now, that might mean a lot to you, but it means a lot in that day. So she shows up, and the moment that Boaz sees her, she says something very interesting. She says it on purpose. She refers to him spreading his wings over her. This is a direct reference to Ruth chapter 2, where Boaz looks at her and says, "The Lord of Israel will protect you. He will put his wings over you." That's what he says to her. She uses that line back at him, because she's in a precarious spot. If he wants to sleep with me right now, I'm going to end up sleeping with this guy. This is a dangerous scenario for a young woman who's a foreigner in this moment. So she pricks his conscience, alerts him to what's happening, and says, "Do you think God might use you? Would you be the agent of God to protect me?" And he immediately refers to the Lord and says, "May the Lord bless you." Two honorable people in the middle of a horrible, weird, dishonorable scenario, who choose to honor God and not just follow the trends of what everybody does and make it work. This is a beautiful passage because I think it gives us hope that this is the life that we can live. And in the midst of a world, this makes me emotional. In the midst of a world where women are sexual objects to so many men. I mean, I have two girls. It's Father's Day, And how fragile this scenario seems to mirror so much of the fragility of what we see in our world today. As a pastor, to look at the world and go, man, the Me Too movement is trying to give attention and give clarity to what the church should have always been doing. Standing up for women who are being used as sexual objects, who men are using power to dominate over women, and nobody does anything. And it took Hollywood pricking our conscience, not the Church of Jesus Christ. That was our job, and it still is our job. And I believe, much as I said in the first talk, if men would just honor women, honor our brothers and our sisters, honor our daughters and our mothers, and stand apart from the sexualization of the culture, and not look for shortcuts. There's nothing that stands in your way as a man today that keep you from copious amounts of porn, for example. But anything we study shows that it screws up people's brains, it screws up their relationships, it screws up everything. If as people that love and follow God, we would simply, as men, just say, I will not do that. And more than that, I choose to protect and honor and serve my sisters and these daughters of the King because I'm a man who follows God. Even when this scenario sets itself up in a really dark way, I choose to say no. I choose to serve. I choose to bless. And I think that would just shine out like a light across the world. People go, who are these people? Because what the Me Too movement's saying and what we feel in culture right now is people are completely disoriented. They're completely confused, and they're saying there must be somewhere there's propriety. There must be somewhere that people live up to their commitments. And may it be with the people of God and the church of God. And this is not to say that women are weak and need to be protected in every way. That's not what I'm saying. If you're hearing me interpret it that way, I'm not saying that. But I am saying that the vast majority of abuse is perpetrated by men in our culture and in the world at large. And in very many ways, our young women are being trained to represent themselves as sexual objects. And so they're obsessed with how their bodies look and what they eat and don't eat and it is dark and it is evil and it is cyclical and it is infecting every bit of our culture because we do live in the time of the judges. And may God start with his people. We can't judge the world in a way that we will not change. And so listen, if you're a man here, you're a father, you're a husband. Can I just call you in any of those little dark corners you find a shortcut? Oh, this doesn't hurt anybody. Nobody really knows. The Lord knows. He has more for you. Get free. Talk to some other men. Get this right because it does matter. And there is something that happens to you on the inside. And I believe that God would call us to do this differently. In this text, Boaz is an honorable man. Again, I'm ruining next week's sermon. But he's going to go do everything the right way because he wants to do it the right way because he's this kind of man. Man, what would happen if the people of God lived that way in this era? It would change everything.
Thank you for listening to the Mile High Vineyard podcast. We would like to encourage you to respond to what you just heard by filling out a Connect card and sharing a prayer request with us. As a staff, we pray over those each week and would love a chance to connect and pray for you. To do that, please go to milehighvineyard.org/connect. You can also respond by being generous, as God has been generous to you. You can do that by giving online at milehighvineyard.org/give. We hope to hear from you soon. Thanks again for listening.